Hi there, and thank you for joining me for today's live reading of Heather's Treehouse, a macabre thriller by Christopher Allen Broadstone, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Part 1, To Seed. Chapter 1, Purisima Concepción Mission Tejás, 1716. Despelleja los diablos rojos vivos, cried Guarco. More soldiers ran past the Spanish jailer as he cheered them on. Skin the red devils alive, I say, and may God damn them to hell. Roaring with laughter, Guarco forced the jail door shut against the whiplash wind and secured it, hooking a short iron chain attached to the jamb over a crude hook pounded into the door's weathered timbers. In revolt, a wavering burst of light and a crack of thunder unleashed water spikes and slashes of razor rain that assaulted the door. With the intense heat of the day colliding with the cold of this evening tempest, hail and worse would soon follow. Wiping his dark beard to a point, Guarco spit repeatedly into his palms, using the mucus to lube his shoulder-length hair and lay flat what gummy strands the gale had blown awry. Pulling a torch from its hammered sconce, he made his way from the jail's anteroom and down its unlit corridor to look in on his newest prisoner. Sucking a deep breath, he stopped and faced right, eyes down. He exhaled slowly. Executing a hasty sign of the cross, he raised his head and peered into the jail cell through the lazy square cut into the rough-hewn logs of the door. The stench of urine, hay, feces, and dank earth violated his nostrils, but he dragged on the whiff, savoring it. He felt mildly aroused even, the effluvium inspiring memories of the shit he had fornicated from a dozen chained whores and the flaxen piss he had offered in return. Witch, he taunted, you hurt my friend in a bad way, you did. His prisoner did not lift her chin from her chest, nor did she even appear to have heard her jailer speak. Witch, Guarco said much louder, growing more aroused by the beauty of this Indian bitch sitting cross-legged against the far wall, her arms spread above her head and shackled. Brezo, he growled at full volume, this time calling her by her Spanish name. His cock hardened in his breeches, although his witch girl was a little beyond his taste in years. 19, he thought. A saddle horse well overdue for breaking. Brezo, he called a second time, his patience and his prick about to burst. But again, there was no response. Except from the devilish storm escalating attack on the mission village. The thunder had grown so vicious and sepulchral, it resounded like a millennium of tombs being sealed at once. Yes, yes, mused Guarco, rubbing his crotch and grinning at his captive. This tomb is for you, Brezo, and the rest of your red-skinned. Abruptly, Guarco's hand went from dick to door. He sucked back his tongue, nearly choking on the saliva that had collected against the muscle. Brezo's dark eyes were suddenly upon him, as if he had spoken his last thought aloud. Impossible! As if her Indian ears could have even understood his Spanish tongue had he actually transformed his thoughts into words. Stranger still, Guarco, who had been staring directly at Brezo, had not even seen her head jerk or shudder, let alone rise, her upturned eyes so intense, the whites so bared, it looked as if two hard-boiled eggs had been set into her sockets. For the first time in his life, Guarco, the jailer, felt he had become the prisoner. And for the first time since caging and banging an Indian gamine, he felt fear. As proof of this, his cock, so sure only moments ago, shriveled, vanishing into the safety of the pubic forest carpeting his crotch and groin. I said, he muttered timorously, trying to recapture his role as warden. You hurt my friend. Brezo remained silent, although her lips were moving ever so slightly, trembling now, muttering now. Coming for me, thought Guarco suddenly, his wide eyes glued to them. But how can this be? Lips were lips, two blushing worms of flesh, harmless for kissing and cultivating sex. They were not like the teeth they harbored, sharp, their form rigid with structure, their vocation to tear and chew, and castrate, realized Guarco. But he was not only thinking of the castration of testicles and sometimes the one-eyed worm of the crotch, but the castration of the eyeless serpent of speech, the tongue. To have his manhood muted was certainly Guarco's worst nightmare, but the muting of his ability to speak was not a condition he coveted or glorified in any case. His phallus and his big mouth were his only true sources of self-expression, To bitch and bone made Guarco the man he was. Not like Humantos, a Spanish traitor and kindred brute of equally foul taste, who only yesterday morning had still possessed his God-given abilities of sight and sound. Brezo, however, had changed all of that within minutes, maiming him with the wicked teeth that now hid in her skull, were buried in her jaw, and continued to hide behind her fluttering lips. Waiting. Waiting to feed, eh? Guarco sputtered. He threw his torch to the ground and hammered childishly on the door of Brezo's cell, as if he had no key to open the great iron lock that secured it. You stole Humanto's voice, he raged, the accusation running sticky from his mouth and sinking in the drool forming a morass in his beard. You let him kiss and kiss and kiss. You played the tattooed whore you are, and you ate his tongue. May God damn you. You chewed out his eyes while he choked on his own blood. You, Guarco stuttered, seemingly on the verge of tears. You devil witch, he finished at last, although his triumphant blathering had become little more than gruff mewling. Again, thunder erupted. It quaked the entire mission village and set every timber of the jail vibrating, as if to shatter the logs into kindling. Guarco, in his weakened state, fell to the ground in a crouch. His flesh undulated so violently, it seemed his skin would rip, the blubber beneath left to ooze out of him like clabbered cheese from a broken cask. Our fa, he mumbled frantically, clinging to his belief in the power of the Lord's Prayer to save him. If only he could remember it. If only he could say the holy words aloud. The front door of the jailhouse suddenly burst open. Splinters flew in all directions, then were snagged and whipped around in chaotic spirals by the current of the whirlwind that had forced the door and was now flooding the entire jail. Instinctively, Guarco dropped flat on his belly against the ground, hands interlaced over his head as if he were weathering the abrupt impact of a cannon shot instead of nature's elements. But of course, this was war, the diabolic gale of nature's element, of a battle of invisible spears and arrows, the last of which hit their marks true, ravaging and extinguishing the flames of each torch in the anteroom. Gusting down the central corridor, the wind also attacked Guarco's abandoned torch now burning near his feet, quashing it utterly and leaving the jailer in complete darkness. For as long as a minute, Guarco refused to move. He just lay on his belly, whimpering, soaking up the puddles of rainwater leaking through the ceiling, and waiting timorously for God to scoop him into heaven or dump him into hell. Fear of the latter, however, and a fresh hammering of thunder, finally charged him with enough adrenaline to lift his head and plead his case before the courts of judgment. But there were no courts, or God, or jury, visible before him. There was only the nebulous darkness of the jail's corridor and anteroom fading into the gaping mouth of the open doorway, and then the rebellious Tijuana bonfire growing ever larger on the hill in the distance. For a moment, Guarco forgot his troubles and was amazed by the fire, absorbed by its magic, and he wondered, how can these flames survive in the midst of such a storm? Before he could cobble an answer, his mind was ripped from the flames as green lightning erupted over the village and held, blinding him before it was sucked back into the roiling black viscera of the clouds. There it seemed to bound around within the confines of the upper atmosphere, tearing at the lower clouds until an ulcer was formed, the resulting perforation creating ragged lips in the tempest that puckered and focused the green lightning, spewing it as a single bolt. Guarco grit his teeth as the lightning bore through the roof of Brezo's cell, making the heavy wooden beams crack and scream, and the entire jailhouse throb with the sudden stress. The flood of heat and light that followed whined and sizzled, gushing from the cell wherever a peephole, crack, or ill-fit seam of construction would allow. Guarco could feel his flesh burning with the vertical sheets of luminance that cut between the logs of the cell door, seeming to slice him into sections of equal measure. But then the verdant radiation was all gone, the charge of lightning all used up. Only Guarco's shrill howling remained, his clammy flesh dry and tight with the static electricity left by the thunderbolt. Lifting his head, he spit mud from his mouth, but this only made way for a new taste to find his tongue. Fire. Guarco chomped against the peak of charred wood and fresh flame as he scrambled from his belly to his butt. Here he sat frozen, falling back against the wall, legs splayed, and his jaw dropped open more so in awe than in horror. His beloved jail was raging with fire, to be sure, but his eyes were focused between the flames now licking the open doorway leading into Brezo's cell. then onto the image standing within. Holy Mother of God, muttered Guarco. Brezo's upturned eyes dropped and locked onto the jailer. He lifted his arms, stretching them out to his Queen of Heaven. She in turn raised her arms, transforming the jail fire into countless flaming blue-white horsemen that gathered all around her. She released them. With a windy blur of thunder, they rode their searing mounts at Guarco with all their might, trampling his legs and then stampeding in circles over them. Thank you, sweet Mary, he gasped. I love you. In a flash, the divine pain of 1,000 fiery hooves burned away Guarco's boots, breeches, and buff coat, branding his hirsute flesh beneath, before charging over his smiling face to the soundtrack of blood sizzling with tears.